Hey everybody, in today's episode, we are diving into the most up-to-date list as of today, which is May 5th, 2025. And we are recording this episode to talk a little about the metastatic trials that are currently recruiting in the United States, but there's some that are kind of other places too. So I'm joined today again with Dr. Pauline Funchain, who's a medical oncologist dedicated to the uveal melanoma patients in the Stanford area and just, obviously wider California. So we're so glad to have you back. Thanks for joining us, Pauline.
So glad to be back. Thank you for the invitation.
Okay, so I know some patients kind of feel like, why should I have to know this, right? Why should I have to? And we were just talking about this too. Like as a doctor, you're like, oh, I wish that patients didn't have to learn this information. But let's just chat a little about why is it important.
As you were saying, we before this we're talking about all the things that are really good for patients to know who are looking for clinical trials. And I really wish it weren't so complicated. I mean, it is not easy. You can do Google searches and all of those things, and you'll find things, old trials, new trials, but to actually find trials that are current and relevant. Um, in fact, before we did this, I was just looking because you look for fun to see what patients might find for a Google search. And of course, there were all these trials that weren't relevant to the metastatic space. There were trials that weren't even relevant for uveal melanoma. They were other types of melanoma. And so it's really hard to parse through all of this, right? So there's, I think, a couple of key things that are important to look for in terms of trials. But honestly, those of us who are in the clinical trial space are more than happy to walk a patient through all of this. It can be really a lot to do it on your own. And honestly, I get it. You want to do it on your own because you want to be a part of it. You want to be part of um, the team, and we want you to be part of the team. And every now and then, patients find things that we don't find, right? Particularly, and here's where this really becomes important is if your main doctor is not a doctor who specializes in uveal melanoma and is not a doctor who specializes in clinical trials in uveal melanoma, they may not know all of the trials that are out there. And even if your doctor specializes, every now and then there's a trial that's only at one place, and you don't necessarily hear about that right away.
Mhm.
So I think we can do it together. Those of us who do uveal melanoma and do uveal melanoma trials are more than happy to sort of pick apart the sort of haystack that is the internet.
Yeah.
But those are some sort of the experiences of looking through in terms of clinical trials specifically for uveal melanoma.
Oh, I think those are all such good points. And I'm glad you brought all of those up. I honestly can't really say that I have much to add to that because I feel like you hit the nail on the head. And just to reiterate, it is so important if you can for you to be seen either virtually or in person and just be followed by a uveal melanoma medical oncologist. That's going to be someone who specializes in uveal melanoma, not just melanoma in general. Because as you probably found in the Google search, Pauline, if you Google uveal melanoma trials, all the melanoma ones that could possibly come up also come up, which is very confusing and hard to parse through, just very difficult. So I love that you brought that up too, that the doctors who are here and who are in this space are very dedicated, like Dr. Funchain and like so many others across the country. We do have some really good specialists who are actively researching uveal melanoma and who are actively working to expand trial access for patients. And so just keep that in mind that if you don't have one of those doctors, they do exist, and they do exist all around the country, from the Midwest to the West, all the way across to the East Coast. We've got doctors all over. So if you need help finding one of those doctors, please reach out to us. And honestly, if you know of a doctor like Dr. Funchain, but say you live on the East Coast and you're not really sure where to go, I'm positive, just knowing Dr. Funchain, that she would refer you to someone that she would recommend on the other side of the country if needed. And I think most of the doctors that I know of who, treat uveal melanoma patients also would do that as well. Okay, food for thought. We've got, recruiting clinical trials. So a recruiting clinical trial, my goodness, this is going to be fun words, is one that is actively looking for patients to join and to be a part of that trial. So the challenging thing as a patient, right? Like I've been in this space for almost 5 years now of just learning and just seeing what's happening. And one of the challenging, maybe a little bit discouraging things that happens is that over time we see lots of trials, right? Like I think even last year, the year before, there were maybe like 10 to 12 ish. And that was maybe the most recruiting clinical trials I had ever seen on a list. And then we have years like that are only 5 or 6, or that are only, I'm sure that historically there used to even be times that there was maybe only one or two. And
Mhm.
like that can feel really defeating to both doctors and to patients. So we just want to, I guess I want to just emphasize that today, this is a snapshot in time, right? This is a snapshot for what's happening right now, but in a couple months, this could be a little bit different. There could be more sites open. There could be more trials that show up in the list of actively recruiting trials. So, as a patient, like if you have scans, say every 3 months or maybe every 6 months, like maybe your job is just to check in and be like, hey, Dr. So and so, like, is there anything new at your next follow up? And just make sure that you kind of keep in the loop, even if you don't need it yet, just so that you're aware of kind of how the space changes and oscillates, because it does change. It kind of goes up and down. Okay, so Pauline, do you have anything to add to that?
I think it's really important to know that trials change and change often. That's been actually good for uveal melanoma. Uveal melanoma, you're right. Like it really, there were only a handful of trials, maybe even 5 years ago. And just recently, there has been a lot more interest in uveal melanoma. And, thank you to the companies out there who are
Yeah.
jumping into the space. Um, but these things do, many of them will open, accrue a certain number, and then close, or they will open and then be on some regulatory hold because of the FDA, and it looks like it's open, but it's not open. So these things are very dynamic.
Mm-hmm.
It is really good to keep in touch. And sometimes, if you're not necessarily thinking about a trial now, but you're thinking about something in the future, um, certain trials will allow certain things. So you may want to just have that conversation with an oncologist about, if I do X or Y, you know, is this important to me in the future for doing a trial next or doing a trial now? Or, there's a little bit of trying to order what you're doing so that we can maximize the amount of therapies that are available to you. So it's always nice to have that conversation.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so before we zero in on those current active recruiting clinical trials for uveal melanoma, let's just talk about a couple of like key information pieces that we should pay attention to when we're researching. So you guys like get your notebooks, let's just like take some notes just so that you understand what are these kind of key factors or just the keywords maybe that you might want to understand when you're looking at a clinical trial or looking for one. So Dr. Funchain, what is an NCT number? Like why is that relevant and
Oh,
useful?
yeah. Yes. NCT numbers. So those are it's a unique number for a trial, just like, a social security number for you or driver's license number or whatever it is. But that is a unique number for a trial. So if you have that number, you know exactly which trial it is. Sometimes if you're searching by, let's say, name of the drug, you're going to get different trials. There's a trial
Hmm.
for first line, there's a trial for adjuvant. It might not be the right space where your uveal melanoma treatment spot in time is. So it's kind of important to actually get the specific name, because sometimes if you the name, when you read a clinical trial name, it's like 10 words and multiple things and a lot of medicalese. And so if you have that NCT number, it's much more specific.
Okay, that makes sense. And so it's going to help us like zero in and make sure we're getting the right trial for what we're looking for, not just like the general, I don't know, like it just helps narrow the focus, I guess, is what I'm hearing. Okay, so then who are like, what is, when it says PI or primary investigator, what is that? Like, who is a primary investigator?
Yeah, so the primary investigators are it's the main person at each center that has the trial open who is responsible for that trial. It may not be, so if you're in a trial, it may not be your treating physician, right? So there's only one person per site. So by site, I mean like, a university or a hospital. So let's say Stanford is a site. I used to be at the Cleveland Clinic. That is a site. These are all different sites. If it's if there is more than one site. There usually isn't. So if you were, let's say, being treated, let's say at Stanford, and there's an Emeryville and there's a Palo Alto, right now for uveal melanoma, for the most part, what you're going to find is the treatment is at the main site, the main university site.
Hmm.
Getting treated at a what we call a satellite clinic, but not the main place, is less really uncommon, just because uveal melanoma is a more rare tumor. And the people who are involved with uveal melanoma are usually specifically on the main campus.
Castle Biosciences is a proud sponsor of this I Believe podcast. Castle's innovative uveal melanoma tests provide valuable information about the risk of your eye cancer spreading to help you and your healthcare team individualize the management of your disease. To learn more, visit castlebiosciences.com.
So just be aware of that. That's not totally true for, let's say, skin melanoma trials. There are certain skin melanoma trials that are at multiple sites, but
Hmm.
in any case, the expectation is, by knowing a primary investigator, you know who is responsible for that trial. That person and their team will know the most about that trial. So if you are going to a health system where you don't necessarily know who you need to talk to, that's a great place to start.
Okay. All right. So then what about the company funding the trial? Sometimes this information is known. I think it kind of maybe just depends on how you find the information. I know if you're looking through clinical trials that we at a Care Insight share with you guys, like through our newsletter, like you're gonna know if it's associated with Aura Biosciences or I'm trying to think, Immunocore, or like just different other the other different sponsors that we have that are just helping us as an organization to make sure that we get good information out to patients, and in turn, we help them make sure that patients are up to date about press releases, like data that they have released, maybe at ASCO, and we also try to help make sure that people know if they have a new site or if they're just currently recruiting again for their trial. So why do you think it's important to, have a background or, have any level of understanding of who the company is that's funding the trial?
Yeah, this is where we were talking before. I was just, all of these details, I just wish patients didn't have to wade through. I
Hmm.
think you're a more prepared patient if you have all of these pieces of information, for sure. But especially if you're in places where there are not where there isn't a uveal melanoma specialist nearby who really
Hmm.
knows a lot about uveal melanoma. Um, Having each and every bit of these pieces of information, so the NCT number, who the primary investigator is, the next nearest site to you, and who the company is that's sponsoring it, can really help. So in the case of knowing the company, sometimes if you don't have a link to a primary investigator or a specific site, you can actually find out more information from the company. They sometimes have patient advocates or navigators who can help you with more information, where to find the next nearest site, who the
Hmm.
investigator is, and in some cases they can help with. They will actually have people who will help with reimbursement for trials and things like that. So it's not every trial has extra reimbursements, but sometimes they do, and sometimes you do
Yeah.
actually end up interacting directly with the company.
Okay, so really good points, right? I have a couple of follow-up questions. I've like come in contact through the clinic that I go to, and I'm sure some other patients have, just kind of depending on the center you go to. But I've come in contact with someone who calls themselves an oncology nurse navigator. What's the role of a nurse navigator in clinical trial care, like at, say Stanford or a unique center?
Yeah. So nurse navigators are patient's best friend. They're also a doctor's best friend, to be honest.
Yes.
But nurse navigators are nurses who guide a patient through their treatments, where to go, what scans are next. They're sort of the main point person for all the logistics of what you're doing, right? Your doctor is looking at all your test results and looking at you and, talking to you to understand where you are in life and then putting that all together to make a plan. The nurse navigator is kind of the person who's helping to helping you execute that plan. I often call them the air traffic controllers. They kind of know all the different pieces of where you should be landing and at what time and
Mm,
which airport and that kind of thing. So they are gold in every cancer center. I wish we had twice as many of them at every cancer center.
yeah, for sure.
And and they will help. So they help with a lot of trials involve standard of care things. So
Hmm.
the drug itself may be experimental, but the scan is a normal scan that goes through
Hmm.
your normal insurance and that kind of thing. And so your nurse navigator is someone who can schedule that scan, make sure that you have the time, make sure that all the financial people have the information they need to get that scan paid for. And there are specific nurse navigators that actually are in trials. So they actually can walk you through all of the trial specific things. And sometimes the nurse navigators, sometimes you'll have a clinical trial nurse navigator, sometimes you'll have a standard of care nurse navigator, and sometimes you have both. Sometimes they work together.
Okay. So you mentioned this a little bit, right? You touched on a little bit of this topic, but do clinical trials get covered by health insurance? And who helps to navigate the health insurance for the patient?
Yes. So, yes, this is a fabulous question. We try to make sure to talk about this every time we talk about a trial because this is something patients need to know. So the whole thing about trials is the part of the trial that is experimental is
Hmm.
paid for by the trial. So an experimental drug is paid for by trial. Any blood tests that are done because this is to help the science of the drug, that is paid for by the trial. Any if the normally you would get scans every 3 months, but this trial wants scans every 6 weeks, then the sort of unnecessary scans from a standard of care point of view, those are covered by trial. But things that you would normally do that wouldn't be part of a trial. So you would normally get scans every 3 months, or you would
Hmm.
normally see a physician every 3 months, that kind of thing. Those will get billed to insurance. So they're covered the way your insurance covers them. So if your insurance totally covers your scans, then those scans are totally covered. If your insurance only pays 50% of scans and the rest of it goes to a deductible or whatever, that's how it goes for the standard of care parts of it. But anything that is additional that the standard of that the experimental drug adds is covered by the trial.
Okay.
Does that answer the question?
Yeah, that totally does. And I
Okay.
think this also just illustrates how important an oncology nurse navigator is, especially in the clinical trial space, because I'm sure that
Yeah.
they're really helping to, orchestrate all of the behind the scenes pieces of like what gets billed to insurance and when.
Yeah,
So,
I will say that is often partially the nurse navigator in that the nurse navigator handles the standard of care stuff, but
mhm.
it is also partially the clinical trial team. So it's actually the clinical trial team. There's usually someone who's designated to name. I mean, this is why trials get really expensive to do, but there's like literally someone who sits there and is like, of the 102 things that you do, in terms of tests and vital signs and like every little piece of it, they're like, this gets billed to trial, this gets
Yeah.
billed to standard of care, this gets billed to trial, and then pushes
Yeah.
all the paperwork to the right
Oh my
space.
gosh.
So it's complicated. You hopefully don't have to see it, but it's good to know that it's happening in the background
Yeah.
because occasionally, there's going to be something that either gets put in the wrong place or there's a question about where it goes and you may hear about it as a patient. So it's kind of nice to know that that happens in the background.
Yeah. Well, and I know too that like sometimes understanding our insurance is a whole full-time job as a
Oh,
patient as
geez,
well. And like we don't need
100%.
to dive in too much to that, but I know that sometimes it
Yeah.
can, especially for a rare disease space. I know like just looking at my insurance, most of the time anything rare disease focused isn't really going to come up in my like insurance benefits, right? So like there is a spot in my insurance that says something about, patients can do clinical trials. The challenge is that it only says a specific cancer type. And so then it's like, okay, but what about the other like hundreds of types of cancer? Or, like how do we do that? And so it's helpful to know, I think, that, the medical team, the clinical trial team, everybody works together to just make sure that this is really as little of a burden on the patient as possible, because they are actively participating in the research study, which is a huge that's a huge feat in and of itself.
Yeah, I mean, I'll say as somebody who's on a trial, you'll feel like a lot of hands are in the pot, and there's a lot of cooks in the
Yeah.
kitchen. Um, but I will say the plus to that, honestly, is that clinical trial patients, you know, I, I think it's very fair to say clinical trial patients are monitored much more closely, and there are a
Hmm.
lot more eyes on what happens to a clinical trial patient in terms of side effects, in terms of response, in terms of the billing. So it's a little bit more complex, but it's a lot more people who are watching you, and I actually like that a lot. There's a lot of safety to that in terms of medical safety and financial safety.
Hmm. Okay, so kind of two main questions before we get to the list of trials that are currently recruiting right now. So promise you guys those are coming. Keep a lookout. Get your notebooks ready. We are going to be talking about that. But what do you think are some of the main barriers or even motivating factors that have patients choose to participate in a clinical trial or not, in your practice or otherwise? Just kind of what you see.
Yeah, so let's do barriers first. So barriers, I think one of the main barriers is travel.
Yeah.
Um, Clinical trials usually involve a couple of extra visits, especially on the front end, to make sure that a patient is safe going into a trial.
Mm-hmm.
But then there's also a lot, some of these experimental regimens can be, every 2 weeks, in some cases every week. Um, and all that travel is, it's a lot. It's a lot of parking, it's a lot of
Time off of
gas, it's a
work.
lot of time away from work, it's all of those things. So I think that is one of the barriers. You know, I think some companies will try to defray the costs of some of these things. There are
Mm-hmm.
some trials that do support travel, and some academic centers that have a little bit more room to support travel. So those are good things to know. But ultimately, the time that it takes, that's not something that we're um, there's not a way to defray that. It's just a commitment.
Yeah.
So it's one of those things to know. I think another barrier is randomization.
Mm-hmm.
So that doesn't happen in a lot of trials, but if it's an exciting trial, randomization is happening. So the most exciting trials, I think, are the trials that are where there's a drug that we really think we've seen efficacy, we've seen that it's decently safe in terms of side effects. These are the phase 1 and 2 trials. And then in the phase 3 trial, we are trying to see if this drug is good enough to make it to market, which is pretty exciting because that means that you feel pretty safe, that there's some good data behind it.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but then the cost of being at sort of the cutting edge of almost approved drug is that most of the time these trials are randomized, so randomization is a way to make sure that we actually know this drug is making a difference over the next best thing, right?
Okay.
So whatever is the next best thing, or the thing that is currently the standard of care, we need to compare the new thing to that and make sure it's better. And the only way we can do that faithfully is to take half of the people and put them on the experimental drug, and half of the people and put them on what we would normally give for standard of care. And the only way to fairly do that is to essentially flip a coin. And
Mm-hmm.
which means that when you walk into a trial, sometimes you're faced with the not being able to choose what your drug is going to be, whether it's going to be the experimental drug or the um, standard of care drug. And that sort of I mean, it's not very long, but it's, a week or a couple of days or whatever where you're waiting to see what your fate is, and it's based on the flip of a coin and not based on your decision making. Cancer is a lot about um, managing your sense of control of your life.
Hmm.
As much as you are in so much control of your life for every other thing, to not have control over this thing called cancer is a huge burden for patients. And to put on top of that, like you're going to do a flip of a coin, it's difficult.
Yeah.
I fully realize as a human being that is a really difficult thing to do. As a scientist and doctor that wants to see these drugs go forward so that our patients going forward can have access to cool new things,
Hmm.
you want randomization to, you want to minimize that emotional aspect of it, but it's there. And
Okay.
that can sometimes be a barrier. Um, so that's
So
barriers. And then,
can I ask a
yeah,
question
go
about
for it.
this one, this specific
Yeah,
barrier?
yeah. Yeah.
This has just been something that's come up for me, and I don't know about you
Hmm.
guys if you've seen, medical dramas on TV or just movies. Like a lot of the times when we see things in the media talking about clinical trials, there's this aspect of randomization, but there's also the blinded aspect of it. I
Yeah,
have yet to see that blinded, like a
yeah,
blinded trial for
yeah,
uveal melanoma,
yeah,
and I'm curious if you have any insights as to why that is, because I guess as a patient, just from a mindset
yeah.
perspective, I feel like it would be so much more defeating. And in my brain, I feel like it even maybe could influence the data in a negative way,
Hmm.
to say that the standard of care is what you're getting. And so, like, oh yeah,
Yeah,
you're not getting the
yeah,
trial drug that you
yeah,
wanted. And
yeah,
on top of that, like if you are participating in the trial, if that's mentally and emotionally defeating to you, then if the placebo effect, which we've seen studied in so many things in science, is real, then wouldn't it potentially have the opposite effect where it would maybe make it so that there's the potential for the outcomes to be worse for the standard
yeah.
of care than they might be if they were a blinded trial and everybody just thought they were getting the drug, like regardless?
This is such a good question, and I'm actually really kind of thrilled you asked it that way because most people um, get frustrated by blinding and are like,
I
"Oh,
mean,
do
I'm
we
over here
have to
just like,
blind it
excuse
because I
me,
want
tell
to
me that I'm
know?"
getting everything and don't
Yeah,
tell me that, like, tell me I'm randomized, but
yeah,
also tell me I get the drug no matter what. Don't tell me if I don't.
yeah.
Like, because
Right.
I will think and I would rather rely on my brain to help my body in any way, shape, or form than anything else.
Yeah. Honestly, it had never occurred to me that there might be a positive placebo effect um, for both arms, but who cares if it's positive for patients? It's positive for patients for
Yeah, that's my
randomization.
brain,
I,
but
I honestly had not thought about it that way. I mean, I have been an investigator in a blinded trial. As an from the investigator side, you're just like, oh, it's so obvious who's on or not on. I mean,
Mhm.
it's not that obvious, but you tell
Well, but
yourself that
if
it's
they
super
find a
obvious,
way
and
to make it comparable, right? Like if they find a way to make it convincingly comparable, then I think the placebo effect could be real. But,
yeah.
that's
Yeah,
kind of
well,
a
so
nuanced
this is
discussion.
the randomized trial that I'm thinking of involved. So the experimental drug was an injection drug,
Hmm. Yeah.
and the standard of care was just plain old immunotherapy. So then everyone ended up having to get injected,
Hmm.
but you didn't know. You didn't know whether you were injecting real or not. And so then you kind of felt bad for patients who you're like, gosh, if you're getting, sham injection, it's just like a lot of pokes for no reason. And
Mm.
you can imagine in uveal melanoma, the standard of care is going to be, at least for the metastatic setting, that will be Tebi, which is once a week. So sorry, Tebentafus, or Kimtrack. But that is a once a week drug. And so um, you may be making people come into a once a week placebo when the
Hmm.
actual drug is once every 3 weeks or something like that. Then you'd feel really bad about that. So we feel sort of guilty bringing you guys in for either unnecessary injections or even unnecessary infusions of placebo, knowing that half of the people are getting placebo. So I guess, our perspective is like, oh, we're inconveniencing the patient, but it's really
Mm.
interesting to hear the opposite to say, but hope is not an inconvenience. That's very
Yeah.
interesting. Yeah.
Well, I mean, but you also bring up really good points too, that like, the goal of medicine is do no harm, right? And
Yeah.
if you're having to kind of fake the injections and you're doing an injection, like for example, I know there's one trial I'm thinking of for uveal melanoma where they're injecting a specific tumor or two or, however many. And
Mhm.
the comparative arm is, I think it's an immunotherapy, like a
Mhm.
weekly or maybe a,
Mhm.
a periodic immunotherapy drug.
Mhm.
And there's no way to do that without causing unnecessary harm to the patient in some degree, like at least arguably. So I could see
Right.
why that might be part of it, but I agree with you too that like hope is not something that we should discount.
Yeah.
um
Yeah.
and I kind
No,
of, I guess I just wish that maybe there was a little more availability in the space for that discussion.
Aura Biosciences is a clinical stage biotechnology company focused on developing precision therapies for solid tumors that aim to preserve organ function. Our lead candidate, Belsar, is currently in late stage development for primary choroidal melanoma and in early stage development in other ocular oncology indications and bladder cancer. Our mission is to grow as an innovative global oncology company that positively transforms the lives of patients. For more information, please visit us at aurabiosciences.com.
So maybe any of
yeah.
any of our wonderful sponsors listening, like
Yeah.
take that into consideration as
Yeah.
you model your trials and format everything. um
It's true. I mean, a lot of people, I think, as sponsors in general, try to sidestep it because it's expensive, right? It's
yeah.
expensive to put on sham infusions or sham injections. So sponsors,
Well, and I
you've
mean, I
heard it
can see
straight from
that.
heard it straight from the patient's mouths or the
Yeah.
the participants that you would like to be on your trials.
Like
Think
if,
about it.
but that's, we could argue that's another barrier just in general to
Mhm.
uveal melanoma is just the funding, right? The funding for the
Yeah.
trials is going to be,
Yeah.
it's going to be less. These are smaller companies. And I do want to just give a quick plug to these kinds of companies who many of them are sponsors for our podcast and our YouTube channel. They're, a part of the reason that we partner with them is because they're the ones doing the research and just helping to move things forward to clinical trials and beyond. So we just want to make sure that you guys are in the know as much as possible. We stay in contact with these pharmaceutical reps, and they are like we talked about before. They've got wonderful patient advocate programs in most cases, and if they don't, then they're working on having one. And they're just really all very caring people. Like every person that I've ever met from any of these pharma companies, they all really care deeply about the outcome of patients, and they want to see their drugs succeed and help patients to live longer and to survive and to have better outcomes in uveal melanoma. So just know that those people, like the people behind the the banners that say whatever bioscience is, like they are people who care about you, and they're doing the best that they can with all of the red tape and all of the things that they have to deal with, right? Um, so goodness, I guess the last question I have before we move to our list is, how do doctors stay in the know? Like this information changes a lot. So what do you as a doctor have to do to like make sure you stay up to date?
Um, I'm gonna put a pin on that because we did
Oh,
talk about all the obstacles.
you're
I
right. We
do,
talked
if
about
I
the
can,
obstacles,
I
but
do want to talk
not.
about the motivating
Okay.
factors because there are good things about trials, right?
Thank you. I
So,
forgot about that.
oh, it's all good. I just, we talk about balancing the realism and all the facts, and we
Hmm.
also hope is a big deal, and there are good facts to know, and so we want to make a balanced discussion. So I'm all good with that. So in terms of motivating factors, so despite things like travel and transportation and you know things like randomization, patients still really want to be on trials. I think they want to be on them as much for the same reasons that we as physicians want to have trials available. And that is, we all want to move the needle forward. We all want new drugs to be available and approved. And, honestly, new drugs are a source of hope. Whether that drug ends up working or not in the long run, it's still being on a trial is a huge sense of hope. And I can't tell you how many patients we've had over the years who love being on a trial for the hope that it brings them. It's something that is usually not available other than what's on the trial. So it's that sort of ability to say, this is what's normally available, and I have something that I can reach out and get that not everybody can reach out and get. So there is that. And then there is actually some altruism to it too. I definitely have, there's a subset of patients who really are like, you know what, it doesn't matter whether this trial ends up positive or not positive, or whether it helps me or not. I only have so much time on this world, and I'm on this trial to get more time. But even if I don't get more time, I know I'm helping the generations after me. I could be helping a patient like, a year from now with what I do. And it's actually one of the most wonderful things about what we do in oncology is seeing we see people in their worst times, but we also see people in their best times, and sort of reaching out to the best of hope and optimism and giving in them. And so those are the things that really, I think, drive patients, particularly when it's things like, extra blood draws for research or whatever. They're like that, that feeling of knowing that that will go somewhere and help someone, I think is really helpful. But honestly, the reason why we always, as investigators, want to have as good of a sort of trial portfolio as possible is to give options to our patients.
No, I think
And a
that's so
lot of
important.
options are options that are, if it works, it works. And if it doesn't, we got something else that we're going to do.
Well, and I think, this is just something that I tell myself as a patient, considering clinical trials or just things like that in my own metastatic journey. So if this helps you as a patient, maybe, maybe not. But I love what Dr. Funchain just said, but I also just want to add that, one of the maybe important things to know about any clinical trial is that you have the right to say yes, but you also have the right to change your mind.
Absolutely.
And that is something
Absolutely.
that helps me as a patient, because I tend to be kind of one of those, type A teacher pet kind of people who wants to like follow the instructions to the letter. And so like there's a part of me that feels like, if say I were to do a trial, the side effects were too harsh and I wanted to pull out, like there's a part of me that might, feel a little defeated and feel almost like bad or guilty for that. But I think it's so important that we as patients recognize that it's really okay for us to change our mind, and that our doctors can and do support us changing our mind if needed, or if something comes up in our personal life, just whatever is going on.
Yeah.
We're all doing the best that we can to move the needle forward in whatever ways we can, and with the time that we have, right?
Absolutely.
Okay, well,
Absolutely.
I'm glad we touched on the motivating factors, because you're right, that is so important, and I'm so sorry that I glossed over that for a minute. Just I guess let's go into the list. I think let's go
Sure.
into the list, and then we'll cover our last question or two as we end.
Yep.
But guys, get your notepads ready, get your pens out, maybe screenshot any of the little like blips that are going to pop up, and just know that we're not going to be going into detail about all of these trials and like covering, what does the study do. We're gonna just kind of highlight, here's the ones that are ready to go and the ones that we know of to date, with a brief summary of like how, what should you know about this, like is it liver directed, is it systemic, like things like that. Let's just start with our metastatic trials. And keep in mind, guys, there are also adjuvant trials and neoadjuvant trials, which Dr. Funchain and Dr. Murthy and Jaya covered in a previous podcast episode. So if you head back a couple episodes, like, I don't know, a month or so back, you should be able to find one of those episodes as well. Okay, so Dr. Funchain, what's up on number one?
All right. So we have a study that is the darovasertib crizotinib trial. Just in our conversation, we had talked about having NCT numbers. So I guess they'll pop up, right?
Yes. They're going to pop up. So if you want to read it out loud, that's fine. But if you want to just refer to the drug name and then the IDE, or, like the kind of abbreviated name, then that's fine too.
Okay. All right. So let's start with the darovasertib crizotinib trial. That is darovasertib, also known as IDE096. So that, I think, is a first-line trial that has been a long time in the making. And we have seen this combination work pretty well at shrinking tumors in the any stage metastatic setting. And now this particular trial is bringing this combination into the first line. So the very first thing that you essentially consider with a new diagnosis of metastatic uveal melanoma, um, it is very specific. So it does not allow any prior systemic treatment. So if you've already had um, Tentifusp or Ipi-Nivo, or something that goes all through the body, that will not count. You would not be eligible for the study. They also are allowing prior liver resection and prior liver focal liver ablation, but something that is regional, like a Y90, would not count, or you would not be eligible. So this is really front. Does this work as the sort of first step? So that is a Darocrizo study.
Okay, so that's our first one. And then what's
Mhm.
the next one up? Next on the list?
So next on the list then is the RP2 study. So this is an injection study. The idea is that there has been some data showing that injection of RP2, which is an engineered virus, but it is engineered to only infect and kill tumor cells. It doesn't kill normal cells, and it does release some sort of pro-immune signals to help with tumor kill and tumor recognition. In addition, so this trial requires a place that is injectable. So if the tumor is, way deep in the liver and you couldn't get a needle to it, this trial would not be for you. But if there is a place, easy things are in the skin or in the lymph nodes, but certainly in the liver is doable. It just depends on where in the liver.
Mhm.
But if there are different spots that are injectable, RP2 is injected. There is a backbone of NOLOMAB, so it is injection plus immunotherapy. This trial is also in the first line. So the whole idea is to say, can this be the first thing that you go to when you have a new diagnosis?
Mhm.
So right now the trial is pretty strict. It doesn't allow any prior liver treatment. That will change. Again, we were talking about trials changing over time, and that is a trial that is due to change, and that will allow some liver treatments, but again, local liver treatments, not Y90, not Delcath.
Okay, so super good
Okay.
to know, and also to know that that trial specifically is going to be changing. And just, as that pops up, I guess I'll just go through the NCT number just to save you numbers. But
Yeah,
that NCT number will pop up at the bottom of the screen for this specific one, the RP2 plus
sure.
nivolumab. Okay, so I think that's a good recap of that one. Let's move on to our third one.
Okay, so now we're going to more localized trials. So the next trial is Tentifusp with Y90. So Tentifusp for Kimmtrak is already FDA approved. Y90 is one of those things that we use all the time that isn't specifically used for uveal melanoma. But this is just to test the combination, because we usually use these therapies separately, and we use them, one, then the other, and maybe we can do Y90 again or something along that line. But to do them together, we don't really know whether that is a safe, and B, if it works better in combination. So that trial is, again, an example of one of these trials that is only available at one center. It's only available at the University of Miami. So it is a trial that either you're local to it or willing to fly to it, but the two different treatments in and of themselves are available at other centers. And the reason places will do a trial like this is, we can put each of these drugs together. Like we could do it at Stanford. Any center that does both of them can do it. But when you do it on a trial, then we actually can see, not just a N of 1 or 2 of putting these together, but doing, an N of 20 or 30 where we really, really understand if it's safe and if it works better in combination. So these are the types of things that kind of seem like they're just easy to put together, but to do it formally in a trial helps everyone understand how well this works and if it's safe.
Okay. No, that's super good to know. And just, I love that we're bringing that up as well, that like there's the reason behind it being at a single site versus like having many sites, because, I think that it just helps, right? It helps if you're frustrated as a patient, helps to know
Yeah.
why something is the way that it is. Um, and to know that it's not just out to like make your life more difficult. There's a reason behind it. Um,
I have definitely heard that before, and it's very easy to personalize
yes, no,
to
for sure.
personalize trial decisions, and it really isn't a personal thing.
Yes, you're right. Okay, so let's move on to number 4 then. Thank you. So what's our next one on the list?
Yeah, so this is an interesting trial. It's a brand new drug and a brand new mechanism in uveal melanoma. So this is testing a drug called DYP688. So this drug, the category is an antibody drug conjugate or an ADC. There are other antibody drug conjugates that are available in breast. There's a couple that are available in breast cancer, but we have not had an antibody drug conjugate tested in uveal melanoma. And the way an antibody drug conjugate works is that it is an antibody that goes and finds a certain cell. In this case, this antibody is to something called PMEL, but that antibody then homes in on a tumor cell, and so it kind of makes a beeline straight towards the tumor cell and sort of docks there. So that's the antibody part. Well, the antibody is conjugated to a drug, so it's attached to a drug. So what happens is this antibody makes a beeline towards the tumor cell and docks there, but it carries a drug with it. And in this case, the drug, random random name, but SDZ475. But this is an inhibitor of the GP11, so the common mutation that we see in uveal melanoma. And so what we what we are trying to do then is take the drug, and usually these drugs are a little bit more toxic. So if you were to just give the drug as an IV or a pill, it would be pretty toxic to normal cells and just make people feel sick. But what happens with an ADC is then you can take a more toxic drug, and if it only then ends up in where the tumor is, it's toxic to the tumor and less toxic to the rest of the body, is the idea of these ADCs. And so this is in a phase 1 trial. It's only in a couple of sites in the US at Mass Gen in Boston and Columbia. I think it's opening at Memorial Sloan Kettering also. It's going to open in a larger cohort, but mostly internationally, not so much in the US. But right now, I believe it's in the phase 1 setting still. But this is something that is a brand new mechanism, so it'll be interesting to see if it works. It just like a lot of our drugs. I mean, it sounds like a really good idea, and we'll see
Yeah, it's
if
like,
it
oh,
ends
this
up
sounds
being a really
great.
good idea. Yeah. But again, this is a
Okay.
phase 1 trial. And as we were saying before, for phase 1 trials, the idea is not to see if if this drug works or not. It's really to see what dose is the best dose to use and the highest dose we can use without getting too toxic is really the
Mhm.
point of a phase 1 trial. And that's where this drug is right now.
Okay. Well, that's also duly good to know, right? And maybe we could talk about that another time, like kind of like the differences between the different phases and why you might want to be, entertaining a phase 1, phase 2, or phase 3 trial. And actually I think that we have done a little bit of some discussions of that as well on the podcast in prior years. So but That's good to like understand that nuance. Okay, so our fifth and final one that we have for the active recruiting list right now is the next on my list. I'll let you go ahead and we can
It was
cover
a
that
print
one.
TCR. So this one isn't actually actively recruiting, but
Oh,
it
yes, I
was
forgot.
a recently accruing trial. So this was a phase one that was presented last year, and I
Hmm.
wanted to talk about it just because there was a uveal melanoma that that was treated on this trial, somebody with uveal melanoma who had a really great response, like someone whose uveal melanoma had been pretty resistant to everything that we have so far and had a great response to this drug. So, I just want to bring it out there because it's nice to know that these phase one trials do end up in some good results every now and then. So even though, so you may be in a situation where you're coming to your oncologist and they say, look, we've tried everything that's available. These other trials, you're not a candidate for, but we do have some phase one trials. So phase one trials traditionally, as you just heard, are really to determine toxicity levels and not to determine efficacy, but they are an opportunity for hope. If your body can take a phase one trial, if you've been through a lot of drugs, sometimes your body's not there, right? Sometimes that is not in the cards for you. This is not the way to live the time that you have. But for some people who are just like, I've tried everything and I'm just as fit as the first day I started all of this, and I'm really looking to do something. A phase one trial is something to consider. And I wanted to bring up this drug. So it's a PRAME TCRT. It's called IMA 203. That was a phase one trial that closed last year, and a patient with uveal melanoma who had a really fantastic response. So phase one trials, not everybody's cup of tea. You may be recommended for them, you may be recommended not to do them, but it is something to think about. And every now and then you get something really good out of it. So I just
Yeah.
thought I'd bring that last trial up.
No, I love that, and I'm glad that you brought that up. I guess I just want to plug some of the noise that I've heard in connection with pharmaceutical companies. So, just buzzwords to keep in mind as you're watching this next, over the summer. We've got ASCO coming up, and these like oncology conferences are one of the best ways that our oncologists and the researchers who are in this space stay in the know as to like what's the current data for these trials, but also are there new ones, right? Are there new ones coming out? Sometimes they announce them shortly after these like clinical conventions like ASCO. And so, just some that I know of in the noise, iOnctura is one that you want to keep in the know. We've announced that on social media. They are recruiting in Europe, but they do have sites coming to the US. They're just not open yet. So, just keeping that in mind. And then I know another one that we've talked about before on the podcast is actually T-Scan, and they're working on continuing to open sites and just continuing to recruit for uveal melanoma. But it's there's some nuance to when and how often and which sites, and so just kind of some of those ones are ones to keep in mind. Is there any other like potential companies you can think of that people should watch out for?
No, not other than you had a great list there. But yeah, that's what we've got so far.
Yeah. Well, and like you guys, we talked about this before. This changes, right? The number of trials, like it may seem like, okay, like there's only 4 or 5 right now that are actively recruiting, but there's also some that have some rapidly expanding sites. There's some with really good efficacy. So that means like the efficacy is, I don't think we covered this, but efficacy means how well does it work? And so the data around some of these that are, in the phase 3 trial or phase 2, phase 3, some of the data is really, really solid. And that's really encouraging and really hopeful. So just know that these are out there. And I love that you talked about just that being an important aspect of this, that patients have the hope, right?
Yeah, yeah. Oh, you know what? Um, Now that we're talking, I just remembered there is a trial. I don't have the NCT number at the
That's
moment,
okay. We'll find it later.
but there is a trial using cellular therapy, so using TIL. That is a one center trial that is at Memorial Sloan Kettering. And that is, for those of you who have not heard about TIL, I mean, it's a very intense regimen, but has been showing some great results in skin melanoma and was approved, FDA approved earlier last year. But TIL TIL treatment is you have to have tumor that is resectable, needs to be surgically resectable. That surgically resected tumor gets sent to a company, which then filters out all of the T cells that are inside the tumor trying to attack the tumor. So those are your own immune cells that now have recognized this is bad news, and knows how to sort of infiltrate into the headquarters. And so they take up these T cells. You can think of them as, like Navy SEALs, and they clone them. So they clone them to the billions, multiple billions. And then when they are cloned, so it usually takes about 5 weeks or so, they are sent back to your site, and then a patient undergoes what's called lymphodepleting chemotherapy. So that means chemotherapy that knocks out your bone marrow, because you need to have enough space for these billions of T cells to live and grow. So you get pretty intense chemotherapy. It's bone marrow transplant type of chemotherapy. So, you're losing you're nauseous, tired, losing your hair, like all of the things. And then you get the T cells infused back in your body. And in order to wake up the T cells, you get a drug called IL-2. IL-2 is what makes people who are sick and dying in the ICU feel like they're sick and dying. It's like an five alarm um, five alarm system to your body saying, wake up. Every immune cell that's in your body, wake up. And it really makes people feel sick. And it actually can drop your blood pressure to a point where it can be dangerous. The chemotherapy that has knocked out your bone marrow, your cell counts can get down to very low, and that can be dangerous. So there is a treatment-related death with this therapy that is about 7.5%. It's not nothing, but at least in skin melanoma, we've seen people who have gone through everything under the sun and their melanoma is still growing. This therapy can work, but it's very intense. There's usually an age limit. You definitely have to be very fit in order to go undergo this. But that is another one institution
Yeah.
trial, and hopefully that'll get bigger. But at the moment, this is a pretty complex regimen, as you can imagine,
Mhm.
between the surgery and the chemo, and flying your tumor out to a company and all of that stuff. So
Well, and
that is
like
what limits that trial.
I don't know if you know of this patient, but I know of at least one patient who was on kind of the earlier TIL trial. And she had uveal melanoma, and she's one of the rare people who had, I think they're calling it a complete response. I think she's more than 5 years out from metastatic. She has a very intriguing story. I'm really hoping to get Katie Doble on the podcast soon.
That's
But
cool.
she is someone that you can look up some information about on social media. She's all over on some different news articles, things like that. So there is some reason
Oh
to
yeah.
consider, but I love that you just outlined some of the good things to be aware of as well, like just in considering that as an option. Well, Dr. Funchain, I so appreciate you, and I feel like we've had such a dense discussion. So you guys, like, please save this, come back to it, listen to it again if you need to, send it to somebody else to absorb the information on your behalf if needed. But Dr. Funchain, thank you so much for your time and for just providing this space of I feel like empowering information, but also just I feel like a good message of hope to patients with ocular melanoma.
Thank you. I always love talking about these things because it's good to know there are options out there.
Yeah.
And it's good to know all of the different, it's not just like buying a ticket or buying a candy bar, right? There's a lot of considerations in thinking about trials. And we're always happy to provide information, but it's also different to hear about it from people like you, and to talk about the pros and cons and all of those things. So thank you for having this place that we can have these conversations and talk about all the details, the good, the bad, the ugly, but most importantly, the hopeful.
Well, I really appreciate you and all of the other doctors that we have in this space who are doing the work and just bringing trials to patients and doing the best that they can to make this an accessible space, both through information, but also through location and all of those things. And just another huge shout out to our sponsors who make this podcast and our YouTube channel your go-to resource for ocular melanoma information and just the kind of the latest news. We could not do this without our sponsors. So thank you again to our sponsors. And again, just final thanks to our guest, Dr. Funchain. We will see you guys next time.